The land stretched wide and barren, the color of dust and faded sage. Winter had not yet laid down its full weight, but its breath was already in the air, sharp, merciless, and waiting. A lone rider moved across that plain, his shape small against the horizon, like a fleck of ash drifting where sky met earth. Elias Hart had been riding for 2 days without the comfort of another man's voice. He had known longer silences in his years, but this one pressed in close, as though the land itself were holding its breath. His horse, a gray mare with ribs that showed under her hide, trudged steady despite the chill. Elias had lost count of the towns he had passed through, and of the faces that looked at him without recognition. It was easier that way. A man who carried too many names risked carrying too many debts. Toward evening, the plain gave way to a rise, and from that height, he saw a house. It stood alone, hunched against the endless wind, its boards darkened by weather, its roof patched and slanting. Smoke lifted thinly from the chimney. Beside it stretched a barn, half leaning as though it wanted to rest, and a scatter of bare cottonwoods clawed at the pale sky. Elias slowed his mare. He had not come with intention to intrude, but the storm he had seen building on the northern ridge would leave little choice. The sky carried the color of iron, and the wind shifted with the smell of snow. He guided the horse down the rise, boots and saddle creaking in rhythm, his breath showing in clouds. The house gave no sign of welcome. Its windows were narrow, the kind that watched strangers without being seen. When he dismounted, his legs stiff from the ride, he felt the eyes long before he saw the lantern. The door opened a crack. A glow of firelight slipped out, painting the snowless ground gold. A woman's voice cut across the dark. "Who's there?" Elias lifted his hat from his head, holding it low, his face plain in the lantern's reach. "Just a rider. Name's Elias Hart. I'd ask no more than a roof for the mare and maybe a corner of the barn till the storm passes." The door widened enough to show her figure. She was wrapped in a dark shawl pulled close at her throat. Her hair braided back in the old style, and her eyes, gray, steady, and cautious, measured him as one might measure a hawk circling too close. "This ain't an inn," she said. "No, ma'am," Elias answered. "I'll earn my keep if you've wood to split or fences needin' mending. Won't trouble you longer than the snow does." For a moment the only sound was the wind pulling at the eaves. She looked beyond him, at the mare shifting in the cold, then at the line of storm advancing like a black wall across the prairie. Her lantern wavered in her hand. "You can bed the horse in the barn," she said finally. "And you'll keep to yourself," Elias nodded. "Fair enough." The door closed with a sure click of the latch. He led the mare to the barn. Inside it smelled of hay long dried, of wood dampened by seasons of weather. He found a stall, rubbed the mare's neck, and laid down what feed remained in a cracked bin. When the horse had settled, he unrolled his bedroll in the loft's shadow and leaned against the wall. But the wind rose, carrying the sting of ice, and the barn's boards rattled like loose teeth. It was near midnight when the door creaked again. The woman stood framed in lantern light, her shawl gathered tighter. She did not step in, only spoke into the shadows where Elias sat. "The storm will split the roof if you stay out here," she said. "You can come inside, by the fire, but no further." Elias rose without hurry, gathering his things. He tipped his head. Obliged. The house held a quiet weight when he stepped through its door, as though the walls themselves remembered what had been lost. The fire burned low but steady, throwing uneasy shadows across the floorboards. He smelled beans long cooled on the hearth, smoke clinging to fabric, and something else beneath it, loneliness, old and deep. The woman, Clara Reeves, as he would later learn, moved with care, her every motion guarded. She set the lantern on a table scarred with knife marks and candle burns. "You'll stay by the fire," she said. "I'll see to it you've coffee in the morning." Elias inclined his head. "That'll do." Silence stretched between them. She did not sit, but stood near the mantel, her shawl falling in folds that hid her hands. Upon the mantel rested a locket, small and tarnished, its chain coiled like a snake waiting to strike. The firelight caught it once, then left it in shadow. Elias did not ask about it. In the corner of the room, a small bed had been laid down, and in it a child slept. A boy, no more than 7 or 8, his dark hair braided with care, his chest rising in the rhythm of dreams. Elias let his gaze rest there only a moment before looking back to the fire. The woman's eyes caught his, hard and defensive. "He's not mine." Elias said nothing, only nodded once. He had no reason to doubt her, no reason to believe her. The truth of people's lives was not a thing a stranger had the right to touch. He settled by the fire, the warmth seeping into his bones, while the storm began its long assault on the house. Wind battered the shutters, rattling them like chains, and the rafters groaned under the weight of snow. Yet inside a fragile stillness held, one born of necessity, not trust. Elias felt the weight of the woman's silence, heavier than any words she might have spoken. He knew a house scarred by grief when he saw one, the empty chair beside the hearth, the rocking chair that swayed faintly as the wind pressed at the walls. The locket unopened, all told their story in quiet pieces. He closed his eyes, listening to the storm, listening to her silence. Something in it kept him from rising, from saddling his mare and riding on into the night. For the first time in many months, Elias Hart did not feel the urge to leave. The storm passed, but winter settled in earnest. The land drew itself tight, wrapped in frost and silence, the days short and the nights long. Snow gathered in the hollows and along the fence lines, and the wind carved its song across the plains without mercy. Elias Hart stayed. There was no discussion, no agreement written or spoken, only the quiet rhythm of a man putting his back to the work a place required. Each morning he rose before first light, his boots sounding soft on the floorboards as he crossed to the barn. He fed the mare, then set his hand to the labor that had been waiting too long, mending sagging fences, splitting logs that lay unsplit since autumn, fixing tools left to rust until their edges had dulled like forgotten memories. The woman, Clara Reeves, said little. She moved about the house with her shawl always near at hand, her hair pinned back in the same braid, her face marked with the kind of beauty sorrow never quite manages to erase. She offered no thanks for the chores Elias completed, but she did not send him away either. The boy, quiet, watchful, always near, hovered at the edge of the cowboy's presence. His hair was dark, plaited into braids with care, his eyes carrying something that made Elias think of rivers that ran deeper than they first appeared. He followed Elias at a distance, sometimes shadowing him to the barn, sometimes standing in the snow to watch the swing of the axe as wood split sharp beneath it. One afternoon, Elias crouched by a post he was resetting, the boy standing no more than 10 paces off. He asked gentle, "What's your name, son?" The boy only stared, silent, his hands tucked in the folds of his coat. Later, over the fire, Elias turned to Clara. "The boy, what do you call him?" She paused in her sewing, her needle catching in the dim light. Her voice was low, flat. "He's not mine." Elias waited. Clara looked down at her hands, drawing the thread firm. "He was left here. That's all that matters." No more was offered, and Elias pressed no further. A man who had carried his own burdens learned when silence was a wall not meant to be breached. Yet he watched. He noticed. Inside the house were relics of another life. A rocking chair that sometimes swayed though no one touched it, as though the wind carried ghosts through the cracks in the wall. A rifle polished and clean, leaning in the corner, but with dust at the muzzle as if it had not been fired in years. And in the cedar chest by the wall, folded away with care but never spoken of, a wedding dress. Its lace yellowed, its fabric still smelling faintly of cedar oil and lost promises. Each object spoke louder than Clara's silence, telling a story Elias had yet to piece together. The town whispered, though. On the rare trips Elias made for flour or nails, men muttered over mugs about the widow Reeves. Her husband had been a drinker, they said. A gambler, a man who left debts unpaid and never returned from the tables. Some claimed he had run south with another woman. Others swore he was buried in an unmarked grave beyond the ridge, laid low in a fight no one cared to finish. When Elias returned to the homestead, Clara's silence was the only truth he chose to heed. One evening, the sky broke open with rain instead of snow. The storm lashed the roof, water pounding against the windows as though the heavens sought to break through. Elias sat by the fire, sharpening the edge of a hatchet, when he heard it, a sound so faint he might have mistaken it for the rain. He rose without a word and stepped toward the kitchen. There, in the dim glow of a single lantern, Clara sat at the table, her hands covering her face. The tears fell without sound, slipping through her fingers, darkening the wood beneath her palms. She did not sob. She did not wail. She wept as though she had sworn never to give her grief a voice, as though sorrow was a debt to be paid in silence alone. Elias stood in the doorway, unseen in the flicker of shadow. He felt the weight of her grief settle inside him like stone. He could have stepped forward, offered a word, a touch, some small comfort, but he did not. A woman who had chosen silence would not thank a man for breaking it. Instead, he turned back to the fire. He sat down, blade in hand, and worked slowly, letting the rhythm of stone on steel drown the sound of rain, the sound of her quiet sorrow. When Clara returned, her shawl pulled close, her face composed. Nothing in her bearing acknowledged what he had witnessed. She placed a fresh log on the fire, and the flames leapt higher, throwing sparks into the dark. The boy, half asleep on a blanket near the hearth, stirred at the light and mumbled something in a tongue Elias did not know. Clara drew the shawl tighter and looked away. Elias set the sharpened hatchet aside. He watched the fire a long while, the reflection of its glow in the locket that rested always on the mantel. He did not ask about it. But the image of her bowed head, her tears caught in her own hands, would not leave him. It lodged deep, heavier than the winter pressing against the walls, heavier than the silence that bound them all together in that house. Elias knew then what he had begun to suspect. The boy. The locket and Clara's silence were not separate things, but threads of the same wound. He could not yet see the pattern, but he felt it, the way a man feels a storm coming before the clouds show their face. The snow came without warning. Morning had been cold but clear, the horizon stretched out beneath a pale sun. Elias had gone to the far fence line, leading his mare while he checked the posts, his breath lifting in steady clouds. But by midday the air shifted. The wind carried a sharp edge, then a low growl, and before he had reached the pasture's end, the first flakes began to fall. They were not gentle flakes, not the kind that drift soft and silent. These fell like stones, driven by wind that cut through wool and leather alike. The world vanished in white. Elias pulled his collar high, pressing forward, guiding the horse with one hand while the other clutched the rope. The snow blinded him, filled his mouth, clawed into the seams of his coat. By the time he saw the outline of the barn, his body was numbed to the bone. The mare stumbled, snorting frost, and Elias slapped her flank with what strength he had left. He knew if he stopped, even for a breath, the cold would take him. The barn loomed dark, but another door opened first, the house. Clara Reeves stood in the glow, her shawl wrapped tight, her face pale against the storm's fury. "Inside," she called, her voice half carried off by the wind. Elias tried to answer, but his lips were stiff. He stumbled toward her, half dragging the mare, and she reached to take the rope from his hand. With a strength born of desperation, she led the horse toward the barn, then turned back, seizing Elias by the arm. "You'll not freeze in my yard," she said, pulling him through the doorway. The door shut against the storm, and firelight flooded him. The warmth of it nearly buckled his knees. Snow melted down his coat in rivulets, dripping onto the floorboards. He stood swaying, his breath ragged, his skin burning with the ache of thaw. Clara did not step closer, but her eyes, hard as ever, held a flicker of something different, alarm, perhaps, or concern she refused to name. "Sit," she ordered, motioning to the hearth. Elias obeyed, sinking to the chair by the fire. His hands trembled as he peeled away soaked gloves. Clara fetched a blanket, laying it across his shoulders with a gesture brisk and reluctant, as though she feared kindness might undo her. Outside, the storm roared. The shutters rattled against their hinges like an angry spirit demanding entry. Snow struck the roof in heavy sheets, and the walls groaned beneath the wind's assault. The house seemed smaller for it, pressed in close by the violence outside. The boy lay on a rug near the fire, curled beneath a quilt, his small frame rising and falling with sleep. He stirred as Elias warmed himself, his hand clutching at the locket that never left his keeping. In the glow of the flames, Elias saw for the first time the faint letters etched into its surface, initials, worn but still legible. He did not lean close, did not intrude, but the sight fixed itself in his mind. The hours stretched long. The storm showed no sign of mercy, and in the closeness of firelight, words slipped loose where silence had long held them. Clara sat opposite him, her shawl drawn tight, her face turned half away. For a time she said nothing, only watched the flames as if they held secrets worth listening to. Then quietly, as though speaking more to herself than to him, she said, "I had a husband once." Elias did not move. He let the fire crackle, let her voice find its own rhythm. "He was not a good man," she continued, bitterness coiling in each syllable. "The town whispers truth enough. He drank, he gambled, he left debts for others to carry. One day he rode away, and the house was quieter without him." Her hand brushed the edge of the shawl. "I buried the name, but not the shame. That clings longer than a man's shadow." Elias waited, the storm's howl filling the silence between them. "The boy," she said at last, her eyes flicking toward the child sleeping by the hearth. Her voice was tight, strained. "He is not mine, not by blood. He was left to me when no one else would take him. I swore I would not give him away, yet I cannot claim him either. He belongs to no one, not the town, not me." Her words trembled, though her face stayed rigid. "Do you understand what it is to keep a child and yet not call him your own? To hold him close but never let him be yours? It is a prison, Elias Hart, one I built with my own hands." The fire popped, sending sparks upward. The boy murmured in his sleep, clutching the locket tighter. Elias studied Clara, the way her shoulders curved under the weight of her shawl, the way her gaze held fierce to the flames as though she feared what she might see if she looked elsewhere. He saw not cruelty in her words, but torment, an unending struggle between duty and shame, love and denial. He did not offer comfort. Comfort, he knew, was not what she sought. He only spoke once, his voice low, steady. "You kept him alive. That counts for something." Clara's lips pressed together, neither accepting nor rejecting the thought. She rose, moving to the window, staring into the storm as though it might answer her. Elias leaned back, feeling the warmth seep into his bones, his eyes drifting toward the boy. The locket glinted faintly in the firelight, initials half hidden by a small hand. The storm outside beat at the house without pause. But Elias knew the greater storm was within these walls, secrets bound tight. Belonging denied, a woman held prisoner by her own silence. And as the wind howled its fury, Elias Hart understood. Clara Reeves was not simply a widow guarding her grief. She was a woman torn between the past and the child at her hearth, a woman both protector and prisoner of a truth too heavy to speak. When the storm loosened its grip, the land did not return to peace. The snow lay heavy, muffling the earth in white silence, but inside the house the air carried a different weight. Elias Hart stayed. No words were spoken to bind him there, no bargain struck. Yet each morning found him taking his boots to the barn, feeding the mare and setting his hand to chores as though the place were his own. The barn roof was patched where winter had torn it thin, the hinges on the back door set straight, the axe handle mended with care. Evenings were quieter still. Elias sat by the hearth, sharpening tools or whittling scraps of wood into shapes small enough for a child's hand. A horse, a bird, a little rifle that fired nothing but imagination. The boy watched in silence, eyes wide with the wonder he never spoke aloud. When Elias offered a finished piece, the boy took it shyly, clutching it as though it were made of gold. Clara Reeves noticed, though she kept her distance. She moved about her house with wary steps, as if each sound might shatter something fragile between them. Gratitude softened her eyes at times, yet fear lingered close. Fear not of Elias himself, but of what it meant to rely on another man's presence. She had learned too well that such reliance often came to ruin. The boundary between them was unspoken but sharp. Elias slept by the fire, never asking for more. Clara kept to her own chamber, her shawl drawn close as if it were armor. Words between them were plain and few, wood to split, meals to portion, weather to watch. Then came the riders. It was late afternoon when the sound of hooves carried across the frozen earth. Elias, mending a broken latch, lifted his head. The boy stiffened where he played near the hearth, and Clara's hand froze on her needle. The rhythm of hooves drew closer, not passing by but circling the house like wolves testing a pen. 3 men reined in before the porch. Their coats hung heavy, their eyes sharp with the hunger of men who lived off what they could take. One spat into the snow, his grin splitting the wind-chapped skin of his face. "Widow Reeves," he called, voice mocking. "We've come for trade." Clara stood at the doorway, her face pale, but her shoulders squared. Elias stepped up beside her, his rifle in hand, though he held it calm and low. "There's nothing here for you," Clara said, her voice even, though Elias heard the tremor beneath it. The man on the left leaned in his saddle. "Ain't true. A house like this keeps plenty, food, warmth, and company." His eyes flicked toward her with the weight of insult. Elias shifted forward, placing himself between her and their gaze. His rifle came to rest easy in the crook of his arm, his eyes steady on the leader. "Best you ride on," the grin faltered. One man spat again, muttering. The leader narrowed his eyes. "Who are you to speak for her?" "Name's Elias Hart," he said, voice low but carrying. "That's all you need to know." Silence stretched. The horses shifted, stamping frost into the snow. The men read something in Elias's stance, something carved deep by years that left no need for boasting. Finally, the leader sneered. "We'll ride now," he said, "but we'll be back. Some debts don't stay buried." The 3 turned their mounts, their laughter sharp against the cold, as they disappeared into the distance. Only when the sound of hooves had faded did Clara's shoulders sag. She stepped back from the door, closing it with more force than needed. Her hands trembled as she latched it. Elias lowered his rifle, set it carefully against the wall, and said nothing. That night, when the boy slept and the house had fallen into its familiar silence, Clara stood by the fire, her face turned half away. Her voice came soft, brittle as glass. "They'll come for him," she said. Elias looked up from the blade he was oiling. "They'll come for the boy," she continued, her hands gripping the shawl at her throat. "Not for me, not for the house. For him." Her eyes flicked to where the child lay curled on his blanket. In the fire's glow, his braids gleamed dark. His small fingers clutched around the wooden horse Elias had carved. Clara swallowed. "His father's blood makes him a target. To them he'll never belong, not to the town, not to the tribe his mother came from. They'll call him stray, unwanted, and men like those," her voice faltered, "they circle what they think no one will protect." Elias set the blade aside. He did not press her, did not ask the name of the father she would not speak. But the pieces began to shape themselves in his mind. The boy's braids, the whispers he had overheard in town, the locket on the mantel that never opened. The room seemed smaller for the truth left unsaid. The storm had passed outside, but within these walls, tension lay thicker than snowdrifts. Clara's facade cracked only for a moment. Her eyes glistened as she stared into the fire, her jaw tight against words she refused to let fall. Then, with a sharp motion, she turned away, retreating into her room, the door closing with a sound more weary than harsh. Elias sat alone by the hearth. He watched the boy sleep, the fire's glow flickering across his small face. He listened to the night settle over the house, and to the silence that had become their common language. And he realized then what he had long suspected. Clara Reeves had been living under quiet siege for years. Her silence was not coldness but armor. Her denial not truth but protection. She claimed the boy was not hers, yet the fierceness in her voice, the fear in her eyes, spoke louder than any denial. She loved him with a depth that shamed her words, loved him against a world that would not grant him a place. Elias leaned back, the rifle within reach, his eyes fixed on the door. For the first time in many years, he felt the weight of belonging himself, not to the house, not to the woman, not even to the boy, but to the duty of guarding them, come what may. The rider's threat did not vanish with the sound of hooves. It lingered in the stillness, in the way the boy flinched at distant noises, in the way Clara paused at the window when the horizon darkened. Elias knew better than to dismiss such men. Wolves did not circle without hunger, so they prepared. The days stretched long but full. Elias worked beside Clara, though words between them remained few. He reinforced the barn doors with new planks, drove nails into hinges that once sagged, and stacked wood high against the wall. Clara, shawl wrapped against the cold, sorted stores, laid sacks of grain where they might be defended, and filled jars with beans and flour against the months to come. In the evenings, Elias began teaching the boy. Not the arts of war, he was too young for that, but small things, lessons that might someday matter. How to stack kindling so it caught quick in the wind. How to sharpen a knife without dulling its edge. How to listen to the land, to hear the shift of hoofbeats long before sight gave them away. The boy absorbed it silently, nodding once, his braids swinging dark against his shoulders. Clara watched, her expression torn. Pride softened the lines of her mouth, yet fear shadowed her eyes. She knew the cost of such lessons, but she did not forbid them. Something changed in the rhythm of those days. It was not romance in the way of youth, not quick glances or whispered laughter. It was slower, deeper, built in silence and labor. When Elias carried heavy timbers, Clara steadied the far end. When she knelt to scrub the floor, he lifted the buckets. When she stitched a torn coat, he mended the strap. Their hands brushed sometimes in passing, rough against rough, and though neither spoke of it, the touch lingered in memory. One night, the wind calmed, leaving the world hushed beneath a crust of ice. Firelight danced across the walls, painting the room in shifting gold. Elias sat by the hearth, the boy asleep on his pallet, the house wrapped in a fragile peace. Clara lingered near the mantel, her shawl slipping loose from her shoulders. Her eyes rested on the locket, glimmering faintly where it hung. For a long time she stood without speaking, her hand hovering as though afraid to touch it. Then, with a sharp breath, she took it down. She turned it over in her palm, the firelight catching on its etched surface. Her fingers trembled. "It was not mine to keep," she said at last, her voice raw. "The boy, he is not of my blood. His mother was a woman of the tribe near the river. She died in the fever, and there was no one else. They left him on my porch, swaddled in rags, this locket beside him." Her words faltered, then pressed on, bitter with memory. "By then my husband was gone. He'd taken his thirst and his cards elsewhere, left me with nothing but silence in these walls. I might have vanished myself, Elias. I might have wasted into nothing. But the child..." Her eyes flicked to the boy asleep. "He would not let me. He needed me." His cry filled this house where grief had emptied it. She clenched the locket tight, the chain cutting into her skin. To admit he is mine feels like stealing from the woman who bore him. To claim him as my blood would betray her memory. And yet, her voice broke to a whisper. To deny him each day tears something deeper from me. I do not know who I am if not his mother, yet I dare not call myself such. The fire snapped, sparks leaping. Clara's shoulders bowed as though she had carried the weight too long. Elias rose slowly, his steps quiet on the boards. He did not reach for the locket, nor for her face. Instead, he laid his rough hand over hers where it clenched the chain. His touch was steady, warm, calloused with years of labor and loss. "Blood don't always make a family," he said, voice low, steady as earth. "A man can sire a child and never be a father. A woman can give birth and yet never mother. What counts is who stays, who protects, who gives their life to the keeping." Clara's breath caught, her eyes lifting to his. The firelight flickered across her face, softening its hard edges. For the first time since he had known her, she did not guard her gaze. In the stillness, something passed between them, not passion's blaze, but an ember of hope, fragile and alive in the ashes of grief. It warmed more than the fire, reaching into the hollow places both had carried too long. Clara did not speak. She did not need to. She placed the locket back on the mantel, her hand lingering against the wood. Elias returned to his chair, the silence between them no longer a wall, but a bridge. The boy stirred in his sleep, murmuring softly. Clara bent to draw the quilt tighter around him, her hand smoothing the braids from his face. Elias watched, knowing the truth. She had already claimed him in every way that mattered. Her words might deny, but her touch confessed all. The wind outside sighed against the shutters, but inside the house the air carried a different weight, less fear, more warmth. Two souls long denied comfort sat within its circle, and though the dangers ahead remained, they no longer felt alone beneath the roof. Dawn broke hard and cold. The snow had crusted in the night, glittering sharp as glass where the light touched it. Smoke rose thin from the chimney, curling into a sky washed pale with winter. Clara Reeves stood at the window, shawl clutched tight, her face drawn. Hoofbeats came again. This time they did not circle. They came straight, bold, a rhythm of iron teeth biting at the frozen earth. Elias had been waiting for it. He rose from his chair by the fire, his rifle already in hand. The boy stirred, half waking, but Clara pressed him back with a trembling hand. 3 riders. The same as before, though their eyes carried more hunger, more certainty. They reined in at the porch, steam puffing from their mounts, and their leader called out, "Widow Reeves!" "It's time." Clara pushed open the door, rifle gripped in both hands. The barrel wavered, betraying the storm within her. The men laughed low, cruel. "You can't keep what ain't yours," the leader sneered. His gaze cut toward the boy standing small in the shadows behind her. "That half-breed don't belong here. Not in this house. Not in this town. Best hand him over before we take him." Elias stepped past her then, slow and steady, his rifle resting against his shoulder. He did not shout, did not boast. His voice came low, but it carried, the weight of it filling the cold air. "You boys know my name," he said. "Elias Hart. You know where I've ridden, what I've done. Don't make me add your bones to that road." The men shifted in their saddles, unease flickering in their eyes. Elias's gaze did not move. "You talk of belonging," he went on. "But I've seen the kind of men who measure a soul by its blood. You'll find no honor in it. No place of rest, no memory worth keeping. Only shame, and shame rides long." Silence pressed against the morning. The horses stamped, breath pluming white. Clara's rifle shook, but Elias's never wavered. The leader spat into the snow. "You think one man can stop us?" "One man who means it," Elias said. His voice was quiet, steady as stone, and a woman who will fight beside him. "You want the boy, you'll pay in blood." "Yours first." For a moment it balanced on the edge. Snow fell from the roof in a soft hiss. The boy's small hand gripped the doorframe. Then the men pulled their reins. They turned without a word, but the bitterness in their faces promised the memory would burn. One spat again, and then they rode off, their figures shrinking against the pale horizon. The silence left behind was heavier than the threat. Clara lowered her rifle, her breath breaking sharp. Her hands shook as though the weight had been too much, though she had not fired a shot. She turned, eyes wide on Elias. He leaned the rifle against the wall, his face unreadable. Then he went back to the fire, settling into the chair as though it were any other morning. No triumph, no boast, only the steady calm of a man who had done what was needed. Clara stood there, shawl slipping loose, her breath unsteady. She saw him not as a wanderer now, nor as a stranger beneath her roof. She saw the man who had stood between her and the world, not to own her, but to give her back the strength she thought long gone. Slowly, she crossed to the mantel. The locket glimmered where it hung. She took it down, her hands no longer trembling, and opened it. Inside, on worn paper, was a name, etched in faded script, delicate and sure. The boy's true name, bound to both his mother's people and to the world he stood in now. She held it out to Elias. He took it, read the name in silence, and met her eyes. No words were needed. The truth bound itself between them, stronger than denial, stronger than shame. That afternoon, Clara dressed the boy in his best shirt, the one she had sewn last spring. She braided his hair neat, her fingers steady, and tied it with a strip of blue cloth. Elias saddled the mare, steadying the boy as he climbed up. Clara took her own seat, shawl drawn against the wind. Together, the three of them rode into town. Not to surrender the child, not to hide him, to let him be seen, to let his name be spoken aloud, carved into the memory of the place where he would grow. The townsfolk stared as they passed, whispers chasing them. Some faces turned away, some hardened, but others softened, if only with curiosity. Clara did not flinch. She walked beside the boy as though he had always been hers. Snow fell light and quiet, dusting their shoulders, catching in the boy's braids. The locket glimmered faint at his chest. At the steps of the church, Elias lifted him down. Clara held his hand. She did not call him not hers. She spoke his name aloud. The first time in years her voice carried without fear, and in that moment, with snow drifting soft and the winter sun breaking through the clouds, it seemed the world itself paused, not in triumph, but in quiet recognition. 3 souls bound not by blood, but by choice, by survival, by love hard-won from silence and loss. They stood together, no longer abandoned, no longer alone. The ride home would be long, but it would not be empty.